All right, welcome everybody. I'm Mr. Jensen, and today we're going to make some delicious traditional Americana chocolate chip cookies. We're going to use the Toll House cookies recipe, normally in the back of the chocolate chip package. Whenever we cook, whenever we bake, it's always good practice to go and wash and dry your hands before you get started. That is always a critical step before we begin. That's usually the number one way to get people sick. I've already taken care of that. And as you can see, I've pulled out pretty much all of my equipment, my tools, and all of my ingredients. For today's recipe, just like any recipe, I want to make sure I have a copy of the recipe itself. And I also want to take a few moments and just reread the directions and the steps in this particular recipe. Most recipes are created so that the first ingredients you see on the recipe list are generally the first items you're going to add into your recipe. The last items will be the last items you're going to add typically, okay? So today what I'm going to do is, as I follow this recipe, I've assembled all my tools and equipment. On my directions it states to make sure I preheat the oven and adjust the racks to the upper middle and the lower middle racks, which I've already done, and then I'll go ahead and preheat my oven to 375 degrees. Bake, 375, and start. Okay, so we got that ripping and roaring here, good deal. All right, then step number 2, it says here to combine flour, baking soda, and salt into a medium-sized bowl. So I have 2 size bowls here. This is a little bit larger. I'm gonna save this for my batter. I'm gonna put those dry ingredients right inside here. All right, so first thing I'm gonna measure out is 1.5 cups of flour. When measuring flour, it's good practice to use a large spoon and spoon the flour right into your cup. One of the reasons for that is if you dip the cup inside here, you could get an air pocket. I always overfill my cup container, use the back end of a butter knife, and level that off. There's 1 cup, and we need a 1/4 cup. Take my spoon, purposely overfill it, grab my butter knife, scrape it off, and got that as well. I also need a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Typically we leave the baking soda right in the box. I will take my 1/2 teaspoon measurer, and there's a small little cardboard little tongue that hangs inside here. I will pull the spoon across from that so it levels it out. There we go, done. And then I also need a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. This salt shaker is large enough that I can actually put the whole spoon in there, shake it so it's kind of level, and there we go. Then I'm going to use my wire whisk and just whisk this just for a little bit so I make sure that the baking soda and the salt gets evenly distributed in with the flour. I'm going to set this aside, I'll come back to that. My next ingredient says to add a 1/2 cup of butter, which is basically 1 stick. Again, this is half the traditional recipe, so we cut everything in half. Instead of 2 sticks, we're using 1. So I'm going to take this 1/2 stick of butter, I'm going to open this up, and we're going to go ahead and drop that inside. Now this is room temperature butter. Butter you just pulled out your refrigerator that's still hard does not work in this recipe. It has to be room temperature. I have my butter. I also need a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. Now in our kitchen, we're gonna have a container up front of brown sugar that looks like this. So your assistant cook and your hostess are gonna have to come up and get that from the main supply table. So what you're gonna need is a 1/2 cup of brown sugar. So what you're gonna need is a 1/2 cup measurer. This is the one exception where you're gonna dip this right into the container, and then I kind of overfill it, and then I will push this down right into the container. And then when you upend it, it should look like a little hockey puck when you're all done. 1/2 cup there, and then we need a 1/4 cup of sugar. All right, so I've got 2 containers, flour, which I'm done with. Now I've got my sugar. I can use the same container that I use for the flour and do my sugar. So I'm going to overfill it, shake it left and right so it's nice and level. And there we go, done with the sugar. Now, once you've taken your ingredients, such as your baking soda, your salt, your flour, and your sugar, you no longer need them. It's a good idea to put the lids back on top if they have one and put those away. You don't need those anymore. One of the things that's a good practice is to clean your workspace so you don't have things in your way. All right, let's double check your ingredients here. So large bowl, cream butter, brown sugar, and sugar until smooth. What I'm gonna do today, being we're using a half recipe, is I'm gonna use your handheld electric mixer here. I have 2 beater attachments in here. And I'm gonna go ahead and beat this. Now when you get started, it seems to break it apart and you have a lot of sugars all over the place. You just wanna continue to move around the bowl and the handheld mixer at a low speed to begin with. Then you can turn up a notch. And then what I will do is just pause it for a moment. I'll scrape the sides with a rubber scraper. And then we'll mix it one more time. Really, when you mix this, it should slightly change color. In the baking world, we call this creaming the butter and the sugars. Very important step you cannot overlook. There we go. We'll scrape it one more time. There we go. Next, it says here to add in your egg and vanilla. Now I have an egg I've had out for a while, for about an hour. It's now up to room temperature. It's a good practice to crack it into a glass bowl, just in case you accidentally get an egg piece of shell in there. And if that happens, you can use the actual eggshell to extract that out of there. Add that in, and then we also need some vanilla. Now vanilla says here a ½ teaspoon. I'm gonna use my same measuring tools I used before. ½ teaspoon. 2 types of vanilla. There's extract, and then there's pure extract. The extract is generally vanilla. I like the pure because it actually has more flavor. And so if you're ever in a baking contest, if you wanna win it, you gotta use high quality ingredients. That means you have to spend a little bit more money to get the good stuff. All right, so I'm gonna mix this together. Stop it for a moment because I see a little egg pieces here I can't seem to scrape up with my beaters. You'll notice how I always start at a low speed and then I'll slowly bring the temperature up. Not temperature, but the speed. That's always a good practice. Beautiful. It's starting to change color again. That's a really good sign. Okay. Then step number 5 says to add the flour mixture slowly. Now again, in a smaller bowl, I've mixed in my flour, baking soda, and salt, and I'm going to add that in here. Now, being that we have half a batch, I'm just going to add the whole thing. But if I was making a full batch, I might do half first, mix it together, and then add the second half. But I think here we're going to be fine. Now, I'm not going to turn my mixer on. Why? Because flour will go everywhere. So I'm just going to use it with it turned off and try to mix this in slowly, just so we don't have a dust storm over here. Stir like that. So it's somewhat well incorporated. Notice how I'm moving the bowl around, and then we'll turn that on. Mix it on a little bit more. You'll notice you hear the motor start to auger down and work a little harder. That's a good sign because flour is basically the texture, the structure of any type of baking product. That's why typically most baking items contain flour. That's really the structure that builds the foundation for your cooking. All right, I'm gonna scrape on the sides of the bowl one more time just to make sure we don't have any flour bits on the sides or any pieces that didn't get incorporated. So always a good practice to scrape and then mix again. There we go. Okay, then here it says to fold in your chocolate chips. So up at the main supply table, hopefully you guys got 1 cup of chocolate chips. These are semi-sweet because this is what the traditional Toll House recipe has in it. And now I'm done with my handheld mixer. I typically would kind of just scrape the sides to take off any extra dough. And then hopefully if someone's been helping you with putting this recipe together, you can give these to those helpers so they can lick the attachments that they want to. They're always pretty nummy. Now this next step is what's called folding. Folding is essentially not using any electric handheld machines anymore. Now we're just going to use the brute strength of our arms. We're going to use a rubber scraper, and we're going to take those chocolate chips and fold them into the batter. Fold them into the batter. So as I fold it, I kind of mash it in. Fold it in. So I kind of scrape the sides and then mash those chocolate chips in. I want to make sure I have this evenly distributed. Don't want a huge chunk of chocolate chips on one side and just basically sugar cookie batter on the other with no chocolate chips in it. So we want to make sure as we fold it, we also kind of mash it in there just to make sure we can distribute those chocolate chips evenly throughout this recipe. Again, this is a half a recipe from the back of the bag of the Toll House cookies. The reason we do that is just for the sake of time in my classroom. We don't have a lot of time to put together a whole recipe, so we're just going to give you a little chance to make it, but half the version of it. Typically leaves a few cookies for everyone in your kitchen, which is kind of cool. All right, and now simply we're done, okay? The next step that we're going to do is we're going to get our pan that we're going to bake these in. Now in your ovens, at the very bottom drawer, it's called a warmie drawer, it's kind of skinny, you're going to see one of these Nordic ware sheet pans. These are technically called a jelly roll pan, but in the industry, people often refer to these as sheet pans. This is technically a half a sheet pan, and it typically has this cooling rack in it. So what I'll do with the cooling rack is I will set this near my oven, because when my cookies are done, I will put this hot pan right on top of there to sit and cook for a little while longer, then we'll take out the cookies and lay them on there. All right, along with this in my classroom, I'm also gonna have this brown paper. It's typically above kitchen number 1's small wall oven. This is called parchment paper. It is normally non-stick. There's 2 different sizes. I want one that just fits right in here nice. It might be just slightly wider, and that's okay. Then I'm going to use this gadget here called a portion control scooper. This will be my oven, so I'll set up a temp. It has a little handle here. What I'm going to do is, I like the portion control scooper because it gives me perfect, consistent portions every time. These cookies are known as a drop cookie, where you can take a spoon, and take a second spoon, and just kind of eyeball how much you need, and then spoon it right onto your pan. A portion control scooper is more consistent. So I'm going to take this, kind of mash it against the side. So I've got an even amount. I don't want it, hanging over the outside of the scooper. I'd like it to be as even as possible. And I'm going to put these one at a time on my pan. Now I want to make sure that these are not touching, and as a matter of fact, I want to have probably about 2 inches away from each of the cookies. Why would we do that? Because when we put this in the oven, they're going to expand, and we need some room for these cookies to expand in our oven. Now this recipe, again, should make enough so there's at least a couple cookies per person. Bake these and we will share these when we are done. When they are done baking, what we're going to be looking for, sometimes the batter's not going to come out of here, so you just got to kind of help it out. There we go. Sometimes when they're done, what we're really looking for the end is that these are going to be golden brown on the edges. It's okay if they're not totally golden brown on the top. When we let them sit, once we pull them out, they'll keep cooking in the middle there. So you'll notice with this portion control scooper that the batter starts to stick to the inside. And we'll just have to try to finesse this out. If I can get it slightly coming out of here, I can grab it and gently encourage it to come out the other side. All right, there we go. Now if you notice here in this Nordic ware half sheet pan, we're going to have enough for 12 cookies. That means we're going to need to have one more pan that we can do at the same time. Now on this recipe, it says to put them in the oven for 5 minutes. At the end of 5 minutes, it says to switch. So when these pans are ready to go, we're gonna put them in, set our timer on our phone for 5 minutes. At the end of 5 minutes, we'll open the drawer, we'll take the top pan out, pull the bottom one, move it up, take that top one, and put it down the bottom, and then re-go it for 5 more minutes if we can. Again, we're kind of looking for them to be somewhat golden brown on the edges. And then once they're done, they look like they're golden brown. We're gonna pull them out and let them cool on our countertops. You can use the cooling rack when we're all done, but what I would recommend is just set this on the pan, in the pan, on top of your range top when you're finished, and just let it cook for 5 more minutes once it's golden brown, to let it sit for the 5 minutes and stiffen up so it doesn't fall apart when we take them off the pan. Anyway, this is our recipe. It's delicious, it's outstanding, especially if you have a glass of milk to go with it. It does require a lot of teamwork on this activity, but if we work fastly and efficiently, we've got our equipment out, tools out, equipment out, preheated oven, washed our hands, we've done all those things. It's a wonderful recipe, so good luck.